to again acknowledge that examiners and even like, you know, strong graduates still find this exam difficult. It's not just knowing content, it's again structuring your answers in a way that it fits the marking guide. Okay, so you know, I've yapped about this enough. We get it, the exam's hard. Why am I rubbing it in? I'm not telling this to scare you. I want you to appreciate that yes, the exam's hard, it's difficult, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. What feels overwhelming right now will actually start to feel straightforward. Well, maybe not straightforward, but simple with the kind of right kind of preparation. So if your preparation is careful, considered direct, that exam can be a lot easier than it looks like on the surface. Okay? And that's what today's about, showing you how to prepare in a way that makes the exam work for you. So now let's actually look at, you know, the structure of the exam in the past couple of years. So we have kind of 5 years to look at. 2020, we've got 2 papers in 2020. Multi-choice, always 10 every single year. Short response. So over the last couple of years, the number of short responses increased. And that's representative of the increase in marks as well. Okay? And the number of marks allocated to the extended response has decreased to, you know, put a heavier weighting on short response. Now, so for the extended response, you will have a bunch of stimulus. So earlier exams had 6 to 7 sources. And in 2023 and 2024, it was 8. So that's a lot to work with. So knowing how to kind of integrate sources as well is key. Now, this last column here, you'll see that what it is just saying, you know, for the extended response, is it a 1 question or a 2 policy question? And the thing for the extended response is that there's only 2 types of questions you can get. It's a question where either A, they're asking you to evaluate and talk about 2 policies and choose one, or option B is when they just get you to talk about 1 policy and talk about the benefits and detriments of that policy. Okay? That's important to note because depending on what type of question it is, a 1 policy question or a 2 policy question, that affects our extended response structure. And I'll be showing you a structure today that can help you get full marks or close to full marks. Okay? And another thing, in all these years except 2021, question 11. So question 11 being the first short response has always been a general theory or concept question, and there hasn't been any kind of there hasn't been like any data or stimulus with that question apart from 2021. Okay, so that kind of indicates to you that you guys can probably expect that on your paper question 11 will be a similar kind of question where it's just theory or no sources attached to it. Okay, and this recent trend, you guys can, again, expect something similar. There's no trend in this last column here, but in all of these there is. Okay. Okay. So this here is, so now we've kind of done the first bit. We've understood, you know, the exam, how difficult it is, whatever. The next 2 bits, content and applying the content. You need both elements to do well. You can't have one without the other. But again, if there was something really way more important and the one that most people struggle with, it's number 2. Okay? So let's go into content. So first things first, people ask me, what content do I need to know for the exam? And there's a common idea that it's just Unit 4, Topic 2. That's not true at all, okay? So past papers have assessed content where it's from Unit 1 and 11 from last year, asked you about opportunity cost, and that's like the 3rd or 2nd syllabus style point, I don't remember, but it's very, very early. It's Unit 1, okay? So what's my advice? My advice is to be prepared for everything, but focus your study on what you know is most likely to show up. That's probably everything in Unit 4. If you guys want to go over some Unit 3 and like Unit 1, 2 stuff, more so, if you guys want to know what you should potentially go over if you're a bit rusty on it, that's things like supply and demand, business cycle, circular flow model, how to draw like the what's it called? The exchange rate diagrams from Unit 3, that kind of thing. Now, what we're going to do now is go over some key content from Unit 4, Topic 2. And that today's focus is more so applying the content. So you'll find that this next section will be pretty brief. Mainly just diagrams from Unit 1 and Unit 2. You don't need to worry about the kind of, like the taxation diagrams and the externality diagrams. That's pretty irrelevant, but yeah. Also, you learn a bit about the cash rate in Unit 1 and 2. Obviously, all that stuff is still assumed knowledge for Unit 3 and Unit 4. Okay. This diagram here, does it mainly appear in multi-choice? Well, I mean, they've asked about opportunity cost just last year. Are you talking about Unit 1 and Unit 2 content? Yeah, so the question 11, so the first short answer was on opportunity cost. So I would say it's probably kind of even, but they have asked you about, that kind of thing from multi-choice as well. What's important is, so the exchange rate diagrams, and they've also asked you, what's it called? The current and capital account. They've shown you diagrams from that in the past as multi-choice, and have asked you questions about that. So just to recap, Unit 3, it would be exchange rate diagrams, really, and knowing how they work. Yeah, technically, yes, but like they say on the exam that it's just Unit 4, Topic 2. But if you're in a spot where you know Unit 1 to Unit 4, that's good. That's where you want to be. But like for some people, that is just isn't realistic. Okay, so this slide. This here breaks down all of Unit 4, Topic 2 into one slide, the main bits. Okay. Now, we will refer to this diagram kind of continuously as we go through the content. But a couple of things I want to point out straight away. This one thing from this diagram, biggest thing from this diagram, there's 3 types of policy: fiscal, monetary, and microeconomic reform. Aggregate demand policy is always fiscal and monetary. Aggregate supply policy is always microeconomic reform. Okay? In real life, right, fiscal policy can affect aggregate supply, but we don't think of it like that for QCE economics. So to say that again, AS is always microeconomic reform. So some examples could anything affecting productive capacity. So, so a common one they give you in the externals is something like solar panels, renewable energy, building a bridge, sure. So remember that aggregate demand, fiscal, monetary, and then aggregate supply is microeconomic reform. Now, just quickly through here, CR stands for cash rate, TM's transmission mechanism. We're going to go through this today. AD is obviously aggregate demand. These represent the 4 channels: savings and investment, cash flow channel, wealth and expenditure channel, and exchange rate channel. Over here, G1, G2, TP, they all just represent types of expenditure. Don't be scared if you don't know what this is, because some schools teach it as like different names. Okay, we'll talk about the different names for this kind of thing. TP refers to transfer payments or welfare payments. Taxation, the types of taxation, so direct and indirect. And then this is explaining just what a budget surplus, budget deficit is. Over here, this is really helpful. Okay, anytime you see one of these 3 words, you can automatically kind of associate it with a microeconomic reform. Okay, so the acronym that I like to sometimes teach is PIE, like the food, PIE, so productivity, international competitiveness. Okay, I'm back. I'm not sure if that was me or everybody else, but okay. Can I get confirmation that you guys can hear me? Okay, cool. Can you see my screen? Okay, so microeconomic reform, PIE, like the food, productivity, international efficiency. So very is when in a multi-choice, right? They will mention something like, what would be a good microeconomic reform for, I don't know, some scenario. And then it will give you answer option A, B, C, D, and one of the answer options will mention one of these keywords. That is usually a pretty good hint that that's the answer. Okay, thanks, Johan. So yeah, any of those three keywords. Okay, now we're kind of going into the boring bit, which is a bunch of content, so stick with me. So this is kind of what I was saying earlier. The key thing is demand is always fiscal and monetary. Wait, I actually missed a question, I remember. Police in response, when you say two policies or one policy, doesn't mean like fiscal and monetary and microeconomic. So basically, think of policies as solutions. For the external response, you're going to be presented a problem. There's going to be something wrong in the economy. Policies are solutions to those problems. Okay, so they might ask you about like a supply side policy to fix something, and then a demand side policy to fix something. It's not necessarily limited to just fiscal and monetary and microeconomic. Does that kind of make sense? Alan, I think asked that. Cool. So in the red here, this is kind of what I was saying earlier. Demand side policies, always fiscal and monetary. Supply side is always microeconomic reforms with these three keywords. Okay. A common mistake as well, I'll just quickly mention this, is that people say that monetary policy or the cash rate is set by the government. That's wrong. That's incorrect. Who is monetary? I mean, lucky it's on my slide, so I'm not going to ask that. It's the RBA who sets monetary policy. Okay. Supply side microeconomic reform. These are examples, by the way. So for the person who asked, deregulation, tax. Well, actually, I wouldn't have tax incentives there, by the way. Deregulation, training, infrastructure. Okay. And yeah, remember supply side in real world can be more broadly defined, but for our purposes, we just do this. Okay. Fiscal policy. There's two components. Is it worth learning? Yes, and I remember learning it. I would say if they're going to ask you it, it would be like a multi-choice. But do learn about it. We're not going to cover it today. So fiscal policy is the use of government revenue and government expenditure to influence aggregate demand. So two components, okay? This equation here, you're not going to have to do any calculations with it, but it helps you for your conceptual understanding of what a surplus and a deficit is. Okay? So T for revenue, taxation, G for expenditure. That's from the aggregate demand equation, right? So if T is bigger than G, so if this part is bigger than this part becomes a positive number, right? So surplus. The government collects more taxes than it spends, so we call that a contractionary stance. Aggregate demand falls. Okay? Now the opposite. So if government expenditure is a bigger number than government revenue, this is a negative number. Does it make a deflationary gap? No, there's a lot of things that go into that. So not necessarily. Deflationary gap and inflationary gaps come from aggregate demand, aggregate supply. Do you have any suggestions for good resources for learning this? Oh, sorry, you're not asking me. But yeah, there is if you look on the server, I saw a screenshot one time in textbook explaining, but I don't know where the hell that is. Okay, so, and the last thing, if this number's the same, this obviously becomes 0, right? We call that a balanced or a neutral stance. And that's when taxation expenditure is balanced, no effect on aggregate demand. So, key thing is if surplus, contractionary, deficit, it's expansionary. Okay? Now, the key thing is that it is being recorded. It was a bit cut off, but yeah. So the key thing is that this is year to year. This is year to year. So if I had say if I had say in year one I had a budget balance of 200 billion, positive 200 billion, and then in year two I went to 195 billion. Okay, we're still in a surplus, but because the surplus is smaller, we call that expansionary. Okay, still a surplus, but the surplus is getting smaller, so it's expansionary. Okay, so this slide was looking at this equation, right? So now we're breaking it down into this component and this component. So I started off with revenue, so T. So there's three types of T. Okay, so taxation, right? So direct taxes are anything on income and profits. So it's things like income tax and company tax. Next is indirect taxes, so spending. So goods and service tax is always your prime example for indirect tax. Okay. Levy just means like hold on. Or do you mean like levy the word? Yeah. So non-tax revenue is anything that doesn't come from taxation. So it's levy is a kind of fee. So it's a duties of excise kind of on anything produced. Oh, sorry, not anything, but like certain types of goods that are made in Australia or distributed. So non-tax revenue is anything that doesn't come from taxation. So, dividends, profits, whatever, fees and charges. A very common one, to like a good example that I like to think of is like speeding fines. So it's over here. Okay. Now the last one is selling assets. So this is like a kind of specific example, but it's when you're selling government-owned entities to the public. Okay, so these are examples. So Telstra is an example. Airports, right? And yeah, it's usually like a big kind of it's a big form of revenue, but it's not very kind of like it doesn't happen often, pretty much. Is types of taxes. So I was taught the types of taxes, but I've never seen a question asking about progressive, regressive, flat tax ever. But I do know it, and it is on, if you look here, it is there written down. So progressive, flat, regressive. Okay. So now we're talking about this second component here. So we've talked about revenue. Now we're looking at expenditure. Okay. So where are we? Here. So G1, right? I call it current. You can also call it current spending. Slides will not be uploaded, but you'll get a recording. So same thing, really. Day-to-day costs of running the public sector is anything to do with G1. So examples. The biggest example that's relevant for you guys is your teachers. So if you go to a public school, that is anything to do, with your teacher's wage. If you've been to the hospital, nurses, doctors, again, a public hospital, police officers, any public servant. Okay, that's the main thing. But you can also have these two and three here. So defense, running costs, whatever, that kind of thing. So how does it affect AD? So remember, government spending is an injection, so it's going to boost AD. It's just the matter of how it kind of boosts it. So if I'm increasing it, it's an immediate injection, so it's boosting AD. If I'm decreasing government spending, so it's G1 in particular, so current spending, it's contractionary. This is a good limitation to know if you want to potentially use it for like an evaluation. Okay, so G2. So we call that capital spending. I learned it as G2, but some school, again, teaches capital spending. And it's just long-term investment in any physical social infrastructure, anything like that. So, the roads you drive on, someone said infrastructure earlier. That also kind of counts. Energy projects, anything like that. So the impacts for this, because it's infrastructure investment, right, is longer term, short term. Okay. So, shorter term, you get money in construction and related industries. So more kind of employment, that kind of thing. And then in the longer run, this is the key word, productive capacity. And this is kind of an issue, right? Because remember, one of the words I said earlier that that we associate with microeconomic reform is productivity. And you'll see that I made a note. Where are we? Here. Where, G2 has both demand side. Yeah, exactly. Demand side and supply side impact. But we initially said only fiscal is demand. No, that's good from you. Good pickup. So, yeah, just be aware of that because it does raise productive capacity. But we keep in mind we still call this in particular fiscal policy. Okay, now the last part is transfer payments. I think most people know it as welfare payments, though. And it's just pretty much the strict definition for it is when you make a payment made by the government to individuals, households, whatever. Because this is the key bit, without receiving goods or services in return. So JobKeeper, job seeker, always the key examples. JobKeeper, yep, Centrelink, right? So this is the purpose of it. Here's examples. Impacts. So if transfer payments go up, there's more disposable income, okay, especially for low-income households with a high MPC. So we have a strong multiplier effect. If transfer payments go down, it reduces household income, consumption, and aggregate demand. Okay, so I'm trying to get through this quick because number one, it's really boring, and number two, it's not as useful as the stuff I'm going to show you later. So if you feel like I'm going a bit quick, tell me to slow down if you want. But I kind of want to get to the good stuff. Okay, so automatic stabilizers. So what type of policy is automatic stabilizers? What type of fiscal policy? Yeah, non-discretionary. So the word discretionary, just in English, just means decision. Okay, counter-cyclical, good. Well, I'm going to show you guys that in a sec. So discretionary, the word discretionary means decision. So if I'm saying non-discretionary, that means no decision. So automatic stabilizers are something that happens automatically. So there is no active for them to happen. It just happens by nature of the economic cycle. Okay, so built-in features of the budget that automatically change the business cycle without any government. Now, so we have a progressive tax system. Australia does. So that means we have income tax brackets. Okay, so you might have heard of something called bracket creep. This is a bit related to that. So progressive income tax is as incomes rise in a boom, people move into higher tax brackets, right? If you're moving into higher tax brackets, you have increased tax revenue, right? And then if you're out of your paycheck, if you're giving more away as tax, you have less disposable income. And disposable income, remember, is the number one kind of predictor of consumption levels. So if you have less disposable income, you're going to consume less. Consumption is an injection for aggregate demand, so you have less AD. I don't know why I wrote dampens AD. It's a shitty word. Anyway, the second one is welfare payments. So welfare payments, remember, I said, what were the key examples? It's kind of on my screen. It was JobKeeper and job seeker, right? So as unemployment rises in a downturn or increases, what happens is that more people become eligible. Unemployment benefits and JobKeeper, job seeker is all about, yes, you could. I would probably be more specific if you can, but I think Centrelink would pass as well. Because just because JobKeeper and job seeker is the specific name of the policy, whereas Centrelink is a name of like the thing that kind of gives you the benefits. So, what was I saying? So, welfare payments are eligibility based, right? And they're based off income. So if you're decreasing in income, you become eligible for these welfare payments. So this is that more people qualify. So that means government spending has to increase so to satisfy these people. And that supports consumption, which again cushions fall in AD. Okay. Now the key thing that automatic stabilizers do is this thing here. They smooth the peaks and troughs of the business cycle. Okay. We'll talk about that soon. And these are some limitations. So they like automatic stabilizers are kind of like they kind of help in like normal expected conditions, but in like situations where the economy's going to shit or like something crazy is happening, that's kind of where automatic stabilizers won't help as much, and that's where you need discretionary fiscal policy. So strong intervention. Okay, so yeah, discretionary fiscal policy comes to the rescue. Now, someone mentioned this earlier, but we're going to kind of draw the business cycle to further explain how automatic stabilizers kind of operate. Okay, now while we're doing this is kind of where we introduce some skills. So drawing graphs. Okay, so drawing graphs is super important in economics. Oftentimes for a question that asks you to draw a graph and then write a paragraph for it, there's kind of equal distribution of marks for just drawing the graph correctly and then the paragraph bit. Okay, so drawing graphs is really important. Now, I've got a question for you guys. Whenever we're drawing a graph in economics, what are the key things we need? Okay, cool. Title. So axis labels, yep. There's a couple more. Lines, sure, I'll take that. Points, I'll take that. P1, P2 quantities, yep. There's shifts, yes, that's the one I was looking for. There's one more. I'll be surprised if anyone gets it. This is kind of related to the graph. More so like the paragraph. You don't necessarily need arrows on the end of the lines. Link to the graph, yes, that's it. So you need to refer to it specifically. So these are the elements you need. Title. The title you have doesn't have to be detailed. It's more so you just need the presence of one. Okay? So that also doubles as a caption. Next thing you need is axis labels. So a quick note, when you're drawing aggregate demand and aggregate supply, the x-axis is real GDP or real output. If you forget the word real, you lose a mark. Don't forget the word real. Okay? And also for the same graph, the y-axis is price level. You can't just say price level. Okay? You need equilibriums labeled, you need axis points. Now, so in red here, this is what I was looking for like the first thing I said. So movement or change or shift. Okay. Now, here I made a note where it says 2021 paper with a circular flow model. So I think it was 2021. There was a question where they asked you to draw. So this isn't any specific graph. This is in general for all the graphs you draw. Okay. Obviously, something like a business cycle won't have like axis points, right? But it's kind of like a general thing. Now, in 2021, what happened is that they gave you some scenario and, yep, even supply and demand, basic ones, yep. So in 2021, they gave you a question, like a scenario, and they gave you a box to draw an economic model. They didn't specify what type of model. Okay? So, and then what people did is that they drew the circular flow model, okay? And one of the marking criteria was to show a shift, or you need to show a change in the in the graph you drew. Now, if you think about the circular flow model, wouldn't you agree that it's pretty hard to movement in the circular? Example, let's say exports was increasing in that particular scenario. On the export sector box in that circular flow model, you'll just draw a bunch of up arrows. Okay? So the key takeaway here, and this is something I'm going to drill into you guys today, is that when we're studying for this exam, we do a question, we mark it, and we look at the marks that we missed. Okay? Any marks that we missed, we create a behavior so we don't repeat the same mistake again. Create a behavior so don't repeat the same mistake again. I made that mistake where I was doing this paper and I drew the circular flow model and then I didn't get the mark. Thanks, Brent. I didn't get the mark for drawing the movement. So the behavior I created was that no matter what graph I draw in economics, it's always going to have some kind of movement. Okay? And that's doable for every single graph. Now, this last point here is discussion of discussing the graph by referring to specific points, which is what you guys said in terms of like linking in the para. Okay, and I'll show you what that means in a sec. That was a question. So why is real GDP on the x-axis if the y-axis is price level, which means a disproportionate change would mean a change in real GDP. I'm talking about aggregate, like aggregate demand, aggregate supply. I'm just talking about that. I'm not sure where you're getting inflation from. And from you talking about disproportionate, it kind of sounds like you're talking about Keynesian as well, like the Keynesian theory, where the supply curve looks like this. Okay, so now we're going to draw the business cycle. Okay, you can DM me about that because I still don't know what you quite mean. So for the business cycle, what's our axis titles? What's our axis titles? And I want you to be specific. Okay, those both answers are right, but they're not specific enough. So real GDP in time, I'm looking for good time over years, and GDP would be in dollars. So real GDP, dollars, and time in years. Okay. So just it's better to be safe than sorry. Make sure you have your units there when you can. So here I'm drawn in our real GDP line. So this all should look familiar. Now, quickly, can someone tell me what the 4 phases of the business cycle are? 4 phases of the business cycle. Peak trough, yep. So recession is not correct. Contractionary, expansionary, peak, trough. Okay. So a quick note about the recession. If you use the word recession, it has a very, very strict definition. You can't just throw the term around. The definition of a recession is 2 or more consecutive quarters of negative or zero GDP growth. Okay. So make sure you don't say recession, contraction, or downswing we can use. So this here would be a peak. From there to there would be a downswing or contraction. This is a trough. And then from here, that's an upswing or expansion. Okay. So I'm going to put in, this graph is going to look like a mess in a second. So bang, three different curves. Okay. So let's break this diagram down. So the green line is real GDP. And it's the main cycle we're interested in. Here. Okay. Notice how it kind of curves up and down around this black line. We call that like the long run trend line. Okay. That wave shape is not random. Okay. Automatic stabilizers are part of the reason why the economy isn't a straight line. Real GDP is a lagging indicator. Good. Partially because it's a lagging indicator. But the main thing I'm trying to get at is because of automatic stabilizers, our real GDP line is not a straight line. Automatic stabilizers give this kind of trigonometric shape. Yep, like a sine and cos function. Okay. So let's look at the purple line. Okay. This purple line is opposing real GDP. So real GDP is like this, but it's like a sine wave, right? And then this kind of blue, like this purple or brown line, right, is like a cos wave, the opposite. Okay. Does anybody know what it's called when we have one line going this way and then one line kind of reflecting it or mirroring it? It starts with C, and somebody said it earlier. Coincidence. Not quite. Inverse function, counter-cyclical, that's the word. Yeah. So let's look at what's counter-cyclical to real GDP. So again, real GDP is green. Actually, sorry, I stretched that. Let's look at blue first. Tax revenue. So I explained earlier, this is a automatic stabilizer, right? So as people are getting, more richer, employed, whatever, tax revenue is going up in the economy. And then it's also going down, and they just follow the same. So that's called pro-cyclical, by the way, when they're together. Now, counter-cyclical. So if we have this green line, real GDP, welfare payments and unemployment rate is counter-cyclical. So when people are earning a lot, whatever, there's very low unemployment rate. And remember, the thing I said about welfare payments is that they are based on eligibility. Okay? So if you fall below a certain income threshold, that's when you're eligible for welfare payments. So when people are doing really well and they're earning a lot from their jobs and high employment, whatever, welfare payments are really low. Okay? But then during a period where GDP is suffering and not doing too good, welfare payments are really, really high. Okay? So in a downturn, unemployment is high, so welfare spending rises. And in a boom, fewer people need support, so welfare spending drops. And that movement helps smooth the cycle out. So more government spending at the trough and less at the peak. Okay. Yeah. So together, these stabilizes welfare and tax. Welfare is counter-cyclical to GDP. So together, these stabilizes welfare and tax, right? That kind of is what bends the cycle into this wave shape. Okay. So without them, the economy is just this straight line. With them, we get natural, checks and balances that kind of force slowdowns, I guess, after peaks and troughs to support recoveries and, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? Pro-cyclical versus cyclical and the role of automatic stabilizers. Great. Okay. So this is what I was kind of talking about earlier when I was talking about graphs and like referring to them specifically. So just on a side note, you're not asked or expected to draw a graph unless you've been clearly instructed to. So unless you've been clearly instructed to draw a graph, then you need to draw one. But if they don't make mention of a graph, right? Or if they don't give you space for a graph, you don't have to draw one. So most people are used to drawing one for the external response for the IA1, IA3. You don't have to. Now, this is like just a graph I saw off the internet. Pretty much, this is kind of, I don't think you should, because there's no reward for it on the marking guide. So if you're not rewarded for it, it's just a waste of time to not do it. It's not beneficial at all if it's not there. Would you lose a mark for the external response by including a graph? No, you don't lose marks, but it's like not beneficial to, right? So yeah, even if you refer to it, right? If something's not on the marking guide, they can't reward you for it, unfortunately. So now the thing I was talking about in terms of like key things you need when referring to it, it's this bold bit. So AD to AD2, Y1 to Y2, P1 to P2. So all these elements are what you need to refer to. Okay. Yes, you do. If you get the graph wrong, you will lose marks. So no, drawing graphs is not necessary unless you've been instructed to, or unless there's a space. Like they give you a box to draw a graph. Okay, so now back to this. So we've just done fiscal. Yep, we will do that in a bit. So here's fiscal. Okay, we've done all that. Onto monetary. So now we're going to look at the transmission mechanism. Okay, so RBA is the entity or whatever that changes the cash rate. Okay, the cash rate is defined as the overnight rate on loans between banks. So if the RBA changes the cash rate, it flows onto interest rates. People get confused between what the cash rate is and what the interest rate is. Cash rate is what is decided by the RBA. That is the rate that banks loan and lend money at. Okay. Then what happens to the cash rate? Whatever happens to the cash rate flows on to the interest rate, and that's the interest rates charged on mortgage, personal loans, saving, that kind of thing. Now, key thing here: decreases in cash rate increase aggregate demand via the transmission mechanism. So, what is the transmission mechanism? Firstly, can someone tell me, is cash rate always lower than the interest rate? No, it's variable. So it's we call it a lag. There's a bit of a lag. So it could be higher, it could be lower, it could be the same. It depends just how long the cash rates, you know how there's a period like either, I think it was end of last year, where there was like the cash rate stayed the same for like a couple months, 4 or 5 months. During that period, it would be the same, for example. Okay. What I was going to ask, can anyone tell me the aggregate demand equation? Aggregate demand equation. Yep. Good. The way you guys should think about the transmission mechanism is that the transmission mechanism describes how all components of aggregate demand are influenced except government spending. Government spending is obviously fiscal policy, right? Okay. So transmission mechanism describes how C, I, and net exports influence aggregate demand. Not G, because G is government spending, fiscal spending. Sorry, yeah, government spending, my bad. So when we talk about the transmission mechanism, there's 4 channels. Okay, 4 channels. And a channel is just describing one method by which the cash rate manipulates aggregate demand by manipulating C, I, or net exports. So NX is just net exports. Okay, holy moly, it's a lot of writing. So the first 2 channels, savings and investment channel. Okay, by the way, the number doesn't matter. As in it's not like savings and investment channel has to be first or second, whatever. So when the RBA lowers the cash rate, what happens is that banks follow by decreasing lending and borrowing rates. Okay, so what happens is that borrowing becomes cheaper. So businesses, right, who want machinery are more likely to take out loans for big purchases, houses, cars, whatever. Okay, and at the same the key thing in economics, it's not done quarterly, it's done monthly. Maybe fortnightly, actually, I forget. It's either monthly or fortnightly. So the main thing, a big thing in economics, is that people are profit-seeking individuals, profit-maximizing individuals, right? So if the cash rate's 3% and it's gone up to 3.5%, I'm more inclined to... wait, am I talking about the wrong channel there? Yes, I am. My bad. So I thought it was every Tuesday they meet, or every second Tuesday of every month or something that they meet for the cash rate. Oh well. So savings become less attractive. Lower returns on bank deposits encourage people to save. So that leads to high consumption and investment. So that lifts aggregate demand. Okay. Now, second channel, the cash flow channel. So interest rates directly affect the amount of disposable income. Disposable income, remember, is the number one predictor of consumption. So if all of a sudden I have to pay more on my mortgage repayment each month, I have less disposable income, I'm going to consume less. Okay, so if the cash rate's decreasing, the amount I have to pay in terms of mortgages, right, decrease. So I have more disposable income, more consumption. And then the opposite's true for the contractionary stance. Okay. And this is especially true, it's kind of a side note thing, but we call them variable rate mortgages. You can also have fixed rate mortgages, but this more so applies to variable rate mortgages. Okay. So the other 2 channels. What are the top 2 things on the flow model? I'm not sure what you mean by that, sorry. So, the third channel here is the wealth effect channel. Okay, so interest rate cuts increase demand for things like assets and shares because, again, lower borrowing costs. As asset prices increases, households holding these assets, this is literally what it's called, feel richer. You can use that terminology, feel richer, even if your income hasn't changed. The second channel is this one, cash flow channel. So feeling wealthy or feeling richer increases consumer confidence, okay? And that increases discretionary spending. Now, alternatively as well, high interest rates can deflate asset markets, so make them, cheaper, so decrease their wealth. So you're reducing household wealth and confidence. Now, the last one, and this is kind of why I say it's important to know better Unit 3, because then understanding this channel is a bit difficult if you don't know how to draw the diagrams and just understand the mechanism behind that. So lower interest rates reduces returns on our assets compared to overseas assets. So foreign investors might move money out of Australia in that case. So the demand for aggregate demand falls, or the supply increases, right? Regardless, that's going to lead to a depreciation of the Australian dollar. Okay. So yeah, thank you. So a way I like to think of it is that let's say I'm an investor from Japan, okay? And initially what happens is that I'm looking to invest in the US or Australia, and both of them have the same interest rate or cash rate. So let's just say 3%, okay? Inflation expectations channel is kind of, it's Like it's a thing, but it's kind of falls under the cash flow channel. Sorry, not the cash flow channel. The same as the investment channel. We don't really keep it separate. So as I was saying, so like say I'm an investor from Japan and want to invest either in Australia or America, and both of these countries have like a 3% interest rate or cash rate. Okay, now let's say that all of a sudden Australia's increased their cash rate to 3.5%. Remember, I'm a profit-seeking individual, so I now will invest in Australia over America because I get more interest on my investments, more return on my investments. So that there is an additional 0.5%, right? So what happens is then I demand the Australian dollar, and then if you can imagine, can I draw on this? Pen. So I'm going to draw a really shitty little exchange rate diagram. This is like, price of AUD, or like the exchange rate of the AUD. This is quantity. Okay, here's my title, blah, blah, blah. What happens, this is demand down, supply to the sky, right? So demand 2. So now, versus being at P1, I'm at P2. Okay, there's an appreciation of the dollar because I'm demanding more of the dollar as, someone from Japan. And that explains the exchange rate channel. Any opposite or converse effects are true as well. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So again, this kind of summarizes what I just said. Expansionary, contractionary, blah, blah, blah. Now, finally, on to microeconomic reform. Microeconomic reform is a bit of a tough one. It's a bit ambiguous. But again, the 3 keywords, efficiency, productivity, international competitiveness, operates in the long run. So LRAS, long run aggregate supply. To the right, expanding productive capacity. Things. Now, in the syllabus, it says you need to know some like key kind of historical events. Okay. Here's just some examples. You need to know this, that isn't mentioned, that isn't mentioned, that isn't like any of this 2000 stuff isn't mentioned really, but this is mentioned in the syllabus. Know what it is. You don't need to know dates. You just need to know roughly what it is. Okay, but the figures on what you need to know. Yes. You only you're referring to these, right? You're referring to like the examples here? I would honestly bring it up anytime the cash rate comes up. So if they talk about how's monetary policy doing blah, 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 bring it up. Okay, so that's everything there pretty much. Okay, cool. Finally, on to the interesting stuff. How to apply this knowledge and content that we know. Okay, so the way I've done this is I'm going to start with some general tips. Okay, you guys might recognize this from the Google Drive. Some of this is in there. And then we're going to look at the specific question types. Okay, so number 1. So some multi-choice can be answered by elimination. And have a quick read of what's in the brackets here. That there is a very, very common question trap. So make sure you're aware of it. We'll talk about this later. This is like an approach that I'm going to teach you on how to answer multi-choice. Okay. This goes without saying. So you need to be able to draw a lot of graphs, and you need to have them memorized. Drawing the correct axis label has in the past been, like I think it was 2021. It was like a 12-mark question, and then like 6. It was either 4 or 6 of the marks were dedicated to drawing the graph correctly. So drawing the graph correctly is super, super important. Whenever you can, which graphs are most important, you can ask people in the chat. They'll answer that for you. So always give a relevant example. So when explained to something to do, try to just give an example. Always. And that's just not just economics. That's like a good question principle for like your science subjects as well. PPF as well. Yeah, true. So have you heard of calculate a number to make a meaning? Have you guys heard of that? Calculate a number to make a meaning. Okay. So in economics, what they want you to do, yeah, Brendanomics, bro, my goat. You know, I found that guy's YouTube channel the night before my external. Anyway, so pretty much in economics, we're really obsessed with percentage change or just doing some kind of calculation. Okay, so whenever you have opportunity to, you should be doing some kind of calculation. So percentage change or absolute change. The way you should think about it is that if across the entire exam you have, like, say, what's something reasonable, like 10 sources, right? Okay, and let's just say 8 of those are have data associated with them. In your exam paper, you should have 8 calculations. So what does that mean? I'm saying every time you have the opportunity to calculate something, to calculate a number, do a calculation. Once per source. Okay? So remember, the statement is calculate a number to make a meaning. There's 2 parts to that statement. Calculate a number is this part where you do the percentage difference, whatever. Make a meaning is a very, very common thing to mess up. People forget to give meaning to their calculations. So giving meaning to calculations is called interpreting. So what I recommend, earlier I was talking about creating behaviors so you don't repeat the same mistake. When I was studying for this exam, a mistake I'd always make is I would do a calculation, but I wouldn't give the calculation I just did. I wouldn't give it, I'll just forget to. So what is that anytime I made a calculation, my next statement was, something like this means that. Okay, or like some kind of words to that effect. So yeah, in like a certain year, they gave you a mark for the specific number of trends. Find as many trends as possible, talk about them all. Outliers. So this was like, again, maybe like 2022, I forget. But there was a certain paper where they wanted you to point out an outlier. And the behavior I created to make sure I don't repeat that same mistake was to mention any outliers I saw in my data from now on. Okay. Now, this number 7 kind of is like, it's a very much so an extended response thing. But again, one of the biggest mistakes in the extended response is to not talk about limitations. I have an example of a meaning a bit later. So one of the biggest mistakes is, again, not talking about limitations. Okay, so whenever you're talking about policy, you should be talking about benefits and detriments in equal amounts. Equal amounts. Okay, and they've said it in the Sudbury report that they like you using the word however to kind of signpost when you're to kind of indicate when you're going to start talking about limitations. More on that later. You'll see what that means. Okay, number 10. So, should limitations be in a separate paragraph or embedded in your argument? Embedded, but you'll see specifically what I mean in a sec. I'm going to show you a structure. Okay, so this is a question for you guys. If my entire economics exam paper for 2025, the external, it has 12 sources in the whole paper, 12S. How many sources should I refer to in my writing across the whole exam paper? 12. Not 11, not 10, 12. Every single source. Okay? So instead of saying use as many stimulus as you can, use every single source. So mark for the actual numbers you have to use. Okay? Okay, does anyone know what time lags are? Time lags. Okay, can you guys name like types of time lags? Yep, decision lag, implementation lag. Yep. Yep, recognition lag, effect lag. Yep, induced expenditure. Yep, autonomous. Yep, good. So so again, you know how I said earlier we need to talk about limitations. Something I stress as a really good example for like a very free, easy limitation is to talk about time lags. Now, does monetary policy have a longer time lag or a shorter time lag? Monetary policy. Shorter, yep. What about fiscal policy? Fiscal policy. Yeah, longer. And the way you can remember longer is that you just remember that if it's fiscal policy, yeah, they're going to meet and stuff. They're going to talk about a bill. They're going to propose the bill. The bill has to pass through the House of, Senate's representatives. Sure. So a time lag, right, is any kind of, well, like what it sounds like, any delay in time from recognizing there's a problem, and then coming up with a solution, and then making that solution have an effect. Problem, solution, effect. Okay? Any amount of time that takes is a time lag. Okay, in terms of fiscal would have a shorter, also for non-discretionary, but particularly for, so for non-discretionary, there's obviously like recognition lag, decision lag, all that stuff doesn't exist, but for discretionary it does. And, yeah, true. Fiscal policy would have a shorter outside lag, no? Fiscal policy would have a shorter outside. Yes, yeah. Well, actually, it's dependent on what the fiscal policy specifically is, but yeah. So what I was saying, what is recognition lag? Is recognizing that there's a problem. Using data to recognize there's a problem. Okay? So the point of kind of using time lag, right, is to use them as limitations when discussing policy. If you're in the exam and to think of a limitation of a policy, always just use time lag. It's a free limitation, okay? Or it could be a benefit, by the way, depending on what it is. So for monetary policy, it would probably be a benefit for most times. Now, specificity. Can anyone guess what specificity means for like policies? Or like try to define it. Yeah, targeted policies. So yeah. So if I had a really like specific issue in the economy for like a certain sector or whatever, monetary policy, it changes one thing, changes the cash rate, right? And we have 4 channels in the transmission mechanism. Pretty much the effects are a lot harder to predict. Okay, and monetary policy is kind of hard or bad at specifically pinpointing or targeting the key, like the small niche issues in the economy. Whereas for fiscal policy, I can make that bill that I'm writing as specific as I want. So it's very good at targeting specific issues for maybe specific stakeholders in like a specific industry. Okay. So yeah, time lags and specificity, they're good to talk about for benefits and detriments. What does ceteris paribus mean, guys? The English like translation. Yeah, all things being equal. Okay. Again, so listen very carefully. So every single short response you have, you should use it once. Okay? Use it once. And then for every single long response you have, well, you just have one, use it twice. At the start, so when you say, so how do you use it? Cool, good question. So the reason why I asked you, what does it mean? All else being equal, right? Or all things being equal. So what you do is you kind of write a sentence saying, using all else being equal. So all else being equal, my favorite color is orange. Really dumb sentence, but you get the point. Grammatically, that makes sense. Okay, all things being equal, that makes sense, right? So, just give me a sec. So all else being equal, I don't know, I lost my train of thought. All else being equal, if it makes grammatical sense in the sentence, right? Then you can literally just insert ceteris paribus instead of saying all else being equal, and then it'll make sense. Then you're using it correctly. So if you can use the words all else being equal and makes grammatical sense, yes, they have given you marks for it in the past for using the word ceteris paribus. Okay, so if it makes grammatical sense, you can just insert the word ceteris paribus instead of all else being equal. Yeah, that would technically work. And guys, don't worry. Yeah, it's more so you're using ceteris paribus when you're talking about effects or impacts, when you're predicting things. Okay, but also don't stress too much about using it correctly. It's not as like a bigger deal as like the other things, but you just need to use it. Obviously, if you use it like blatantly wrong, it's not good. But using it like don't stress about it too much. Is what I'm saying. Again, discuss more recent data. Define key terms in the question. Okay, key terms in the question. Very like again, that not just economics. That's just every single subject you do. Key terms in the question. Define it. Okay, question 6, like number 16 here. Sorry, you'll see here that this is from the summary report, and it says comparison of absolute data versus percentage difference data. So just quickly, if I'm drawing a graph over here, and this is like there's my line. This is GDP growth over time. GDP, can't be bothered writing all this out, but percentage. Okay, GDP growth as a percentage. Let's say this is 10, like percent, right? And then over here, that's 20. My axis is super off or whatever. The calculated difference I do there is 10 percentage points. Okay, it's 10 percentage points. The reason is because I'm doing an absolute difference. An absolute difference because it's GDP growth as a percentage. So basis points is for cash rate. Okay, so basis points is cash rate. So because my units are a percentage, I talk about the calculation being a percentage point difference, not percentage. If this was like, let's change the units. If this is billions now, and this is 10 billion to 20 billion, then I can do a percentage difference, which would obviously just be 100% increase, right? Okay. Does that make sense in terms of when to use absolute difference versus percentage difference? Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, so 3 question types, 3 strategies, and then some extra tips at the end. Okay, multiple choice. Multiple choice, as I'm sure you guys know, sucks. Okay, pretty hard sometimes. But there's a method we can use to kind of make it easier. And that method is a 2-step framework. Okay, 2-step framework. We call it causality and directness. Step 1 is causality, step 2 is directness. So what you do is you look at all 4 answer options and you ask yourself, does option A here, does that fit with economic theory? And you do that for all the answer options. So does this make sense with economic theory? Yep. Does it make sense what would happen? Yep. Does it contradict theory? No, it doesn't, so I can stay the same. But option B might contradict theory, so that's gone. And then D also makes sense, and C, just doesn't seem realistic, so that goes. Okay, and that's cutting out 2 answer options. So that's causality done. And now you look at the final answer options you have, and you ask yourself directness. Okay, and that's asking which option requires fewer jumps in logic or has the least amount of steps involved. Okay, or another way you can think of like the least number of steps is which one is the most immediate or likely outcome. Okay, what's the most immediate or likely outcome? So when I'm looking at A and D, I might realize that D is not as direct. There might be, more things have to go right to make D correct than A. Or it might be D kind of has more steps involved to make it true than A. And that's when I know, okay, it doesn't pass directness, but A does. So I know A is the answer option. Okay. So causality and directness. And we're going to apply this in a second. Causality and directness. Now, extra tip. So modality. So options with loose modality. So can, might, may, likely. Those answer options are often favored. Okay. But precise economic terminology, okay, is also favored. So safer than ones with extreme or vague economic terminology. Here's a question. Can you guys apply causality and directness to do it? Okay, I'll give you guys like a minute maybe. Okay, let's go through causality and directness. Step 1, causality. Okay, so identify the changes in the transmission mechanism likely to occur due to monetary policy changes. Okay, long-term structural changes within an economy. Structural change refers to, like it says, microeconomic reform. So, and we wanted monetary policy. Okay, so that there is not causal, so it doesn't pass step 1. Eliminate. B, wealth effect, asset and wealth values of high-income households. This here is a bit specific, right? Because it's not just asset and wealth channel isn't just high-income households, it's all households. Sure, you could argue that it affects high-income households more because they're more likely to have assets and at that, more expensive assets, right? So that, for now, we'll pass it, but I'm a bit iffy on it just because of this specific wording here. Availability of substitution goods and services through imports. Not relevant at all. Not related. So yeah, like it says here, it's about trade structure. That's from kind of unit 2 a bit actually. But the imports bit is like trade, so unit 3. D, the inflation expectations and level of confidence by households and firms. That sounds pretty correct to me. Okay. So that's step 1. We're keeping this and this. Now, step 2, directness. Between B and D, it's what I was saying earlier. D is just a better answer option because it doesn't specify, it isn't so specific to mention like a specific type of household, whereas B is really kind of limiting the scope by just saying high income households, where in reality it affects all households. So D is broad and directly captures what the transmission mechanism always includes, right? But B is specific and limited. So the answer is D. Okay, here's another question. Can you guys answer it? And then also answer this question here. I do agree, it is weird wording. Okay, good job, guys. So yeah, that's what I wanted you guys to pick up on. Government policy, monetary. So these are immediately wrong. So those aren't causal. And then if we're at a deflationary gap, right? Roughly looks like kind of like here's where roughly where the deflationary gap would be. Drew YFE roughly here. That gap there, deflationary. So what I want to do is expand. So if I'm currently contracting, I want to expand to bring myself closer to something like YFE. So that's why the answer is B. Okay, so now I'm going to show you specific structures, okay, on how to answer short response and extended response. Now, these structures are based off, like I made these myself when I was sitting the exam in 2023. So these are based off marking guides from these years, okay? So they have, that is correct, yep. So specifically it's surpassing YFE. Right. So if what was I saying? So marking guides, right? Only has 2020 to 2022. So just DM me that DYDX. So these they don't have 2023, right? They don't have 2024. That's up to you guys to incorporate like the kind of things you need to learn off the marking guide there into these structures I show you today. And remember, it's all about creating behaviors so you make sure you never miss a similar marking guide point ever again, or you never repeat like a similar marking guide point ever again. Okay? Short answer. So it's a bit hard to create a structure for short answer, to be honest, just because there's a wide variety in question type. So one of the best ways to get good at short answer is just exposure to questions, the types of questions they can ask you. But this here still is like a general structure that you can use. So obviously you read the question super carefully, whatever, and you kind of ask yourself, Is there anything specific they want me to do? Is it a conclusion or a decision I have to make? Do I have to analyze, evaluate? Any key terms? Okay, this is really important. Like last year, for example, they asked you about opportunity cost, and the marking guide said that you need to define opportunity cost. Okay, so it's important to define key terms. That being said, though, don't like define like basic terms. Like if it's talking about monetary policy, don't define monetary policy. You can kind of assume that you don't have to for something as basic as that. But opportunity cost kind of goes back a fair bit, so that's why you should define it. So provide and use the background knowledge behind everything. Kind of assume that whoever's marking your thing isn't that good at economics. This key thing here, work in twos. Does anyone want to have a guess of what that means? Work in twos. Because I know some schools do teach this. Yep, skip the first two questions, exactly. Yeah, there you go. So dy dx is correct. So work in twos means to give two examples or two perspectives from two stakeholders, or that could be two impacts from two stakeholders. Okay? Two things, two impacts, two stakeholders. So if a question asks you about, well, I'll give you an example. So 2023 question 11 asks you about how like the monetary policy, how it's transmitted through the economy and how it affects households or something like that. Pretty much, yeah. So you would have to give one impact on, sorry, the question wasn't specifically households. It was just like people in the economy, Australians, right? So you would talk about one impact on maybe households, and then you'd talk about, you know, for example, like businesses, the effect on businesses. So two impacts, two stakeholders. Okay. Another thing here that I didn't quite write, because it wasn't a thing really back then, but it is now, and it's kind of trending towards that way, is that, do you guys roughly know what the 5 or 6 macroeconomic objectives? Yeah, that's correct. The 5 or 6 macroeconomic objectives: sustainable, price stability, sustainable economic growth, full employment, external stability, internal stability, and the last one is living standards, right? If you can relate your answers to macroeconomic objectives, how they relate to macroeconomic objectives, so any of those 6, okay? Material versus non-material living standards are metrics. So how do you structure evaluate question? It's this pretty much. This is like a general one you use. Okay. So my point there with the macroeconomic objectives is as I was saying, is like you need to link them to those 6 things. So if like one of those 6 things, it's been a recent trend recently where you need to link it to at least one of those things. So choose one. And that's a short answer. Same thing. So ceteris paribus. Okay. So yeah, if you about limitations, again, time lags are a good one to talk about. However, if you can, to signpost when you're talking about limitations. Refer to every source, make calculations to get meaning, and then this is what I did, is that every time I'd make a calculation, I would follow my calculation up with this means that. Okay? And then if you get to like the point where you have to make a conclusion, your conclusion must be justified. You're missing full employment there. So your decision must be justified. Okay, so you need to consider both sides equally and acknowledge that there's difficulty decision and make a justified decision. So if any of you guys do sciences, you know how in your conclusion for like the student experiment, or maybe even the RI, you need to use data in your conclusion to answer the research question or whatever? Same kind of thing here. Make sure you're using data. It's a good idea to use data in the conclusion if you can, like your inflation data, whatever they give you, in your conclusion to kind of justify what you're going to say or do. Okay. So welcome to extended response. So the way this is kind of done is that there's this here. Okay, so this is like a thing I wrote out last year, and this is what I was writing in 2023. So we're going to go through both. This here is just basically the same as this, but this is just like better written. Like it's more written as a structure, whereas this here, is kind of like an idea, like just ideas. So remember, for the extended response, there's two types of questions we can have. Either one policy or two policies. This here specifically is a two policy type question. I'll explain what a one policy type structure will look like in a sec. So, I'll probably say, I actually don't know, it kind of depends on you. So extended response, you'll notice that this first two things here look similar. So what do I have to do? Is there anything specific that the question wants me to do? Any key terms I have to define? Now, C here and DE is where you kind of have to, where it switches up, okay? And there's a very clear structure you need to follow. So policies are solutions. So if we have solutions, we have a problem. So policies fix problems. What always kind of the marking guide is, yes, I do mean choose which one's better. So policies fix problems, right? So where was I going with this? Oh yeah, okay. So always, like pretty much always, the first point on the marking guide is going to be identifying what the problem is in the economy. What you need to do is kind of look at the sources, okay, and explain two problems. Two problems in the economy, because remember, we're working in twos. So find two problems, two issues in the economy, okay? The next thing you do after that is you make to demonstrate. Okay, so let's just say we're talking about cost of living going to shit, and then you might use like an inflation calculation to demonstrate the significance of the problem, to show that, okay, it's really, really bad. So step one, two problems about the economy. Step two is do a calculation to show the significance of the problem. Now, number three is you make a statement saying that, hence economic intervention is required. So you've kind of explained what the problem is. Okay, you explain what the problem is. You show how significant the problem is. And then the third step is explaining, okay, because the problem's so severe, there needs to be some kind of economic intervention. And this is kind of where you can kind of go into policy one and talk about policy one. Now, all these kind of other things are like similar to the extended response. So provide and use background knowledge for everything. Work in twos. So you'll see what that means specifically for the extended response in a bit. Ceteris paribus everywhere. Blah, blah, blah. Limitations, time lags, and specificity. Now, do you guys recommend criteria for the extended response? Yes or no? Or does it depend? Two criteria? So it actually depends. So if the question stipulates that you have to use a criteria, that's when you do use a criteria. Okay? But if the question doesn't mention any specific criteria to use, you don't have to use criteria. Okay? That being said, though, right? That being said, you don't have to. That being said, if you want to use criteria, yeah, exactly. Future employment like last year. If you want to use criteria because it feels like makes you feel like you write better or it's more structured better, whatever, then you can. But you don't have to if they don't tell you to. So yeah, again, two impacts, two criteria, two stakeholders. Again, that's all just work in twos. Now, here's just a little example of what a justified response, like a conclusion, could look like. It's a bit, bit wordy, especially that bit, but that's there for you. Okay, now this here is like what it looks like. This here is meant to represent kind of my planning paper in the exam. You get one sheet of A4 paper, and this is roughly what it looked like. Okay, as in like this is obviously a bit more, way more like yap here because I was trying to explain what I'm doing as I'm going. So another thing as well, people ask me about how I use my time in the exam. So you get 15 minutes planning time, you get 2 hours of writing. Yeah. So thanks, Jojo. So during that 15 minutes of planning, what I would do is I would plan my entire extended response. And sometimes in like the writing time, I would also spend like 5 minutes of my writing time as well to, again, planning my extended response. Now, over here. So order of questions. So I've just spent all this time planning my extended response, right? I'm probably feeling pretty good about it, hopefully, in the exam, fingers crossed. So what I'm doing once that 2 hours starts is I'm writing my extended response. I'm smashing it all out. Now, another thing that I'd like to do when I was kind of reading in perusal, I guess, is that I would read through the short answers and just keep a mental note of what the easiest short response was to me. Okay, and that's what I started with once I finished my extended response. So I'd write the short response out, and then I'll just keep going through the short response in order of easiest to answer to most difficult to answer. Now, what will probably inevitably happen is that you get stuck on a question. You get stuck on a question in the short response. If that happens, what you should do is jump to multi-choice. Jump to multi-choice, answer, go through, and then you get stuck there maybe. Then you jump back to short response. And you kind of just repeat that cycle where you're jumping between multi-choice and short response. And then you just keep on doing that until you finish the exam. The reason why I like to jump like that is because oftentimes, it just helps me to take a break from a question I'm stuck on. And especially during the exam, it's very time pressured, right? You don't really want to kind of spend time doing nothing, right? And if you're doing like a short response, right, and you're like thinking of like a negative to write about the specific policy, you might go to the multi-choice and they might just give you a free negative in there, like spark some kind of idea that you can talk about in your short answer. Okay, and that's why I like to jump around. That being said, though, sometimes, I think last year, someone in the server who won't go named didn't give them enough time to do multi-choice. How long do I reckon multi-choice? 10 minutes? Yeah, probably around 10 minutes. Didn't give themselves enough time to do multi-choice. Don't be one of those people. Okay, remember to answer all of it. Okay, so now into actual specific structure for this. So it's very similar to what I said on not that slide, this slide, where you start off by describing two things about the economy that are problems. Okay, the example I've given here is stagflation. Step 2, calculate a number to show the significance of the problem. Why is it an issue? So, for example, source 3, I've done a percentage change there. Here I'm just writing out to calculate a number, make a meaning. I'm just explaining what it means, but I've already explained that. You guys should know what that means by now. Number 3, show rationale for government intervention. So explain that because the problem is so significant, there needs to be some kind of economic intervention. If this is two policies, hence there's been two policies that have been proposed. Okay, 1 to 3 here forms your introduction. Your first paragraph. Your first paragraph. First paragraph is 1 to 3. Okay. Now, your first body paragraph is all dedicated to policy 1. Okay. So at the start of the policy 1, introduce it. Explain what it is. Sometimes they don't actually say what the policy is. That's fine. Just say it's a demand side policy or whatever it is. But sometimes they do give you an explanation of what the policy is. This is a good time to use quotes from the sources to explain what the policy is. So what is the policy, blah, blah, blah. Use quotes. Now, after explaining and introducing the policy, remember, we need to talk about benefits and detriments of the policy. Yep, direct quotes. So the way you structure this is that over here, you've introduced the policy. You talk about benefits of policy 1, blah, blah, blah. And you do the same with detriments, blah, blah, blah. Key thing. Needs to be equal amounts of discussion for benefits and detriments. Equal amounts. Something else I was going to say, but I just forgot. What was it? Oh yeah, sorry. This is where again the work in twos comes in. So when you're giving the benefits, right? Stakeholders. Very common mistake, by the way, is that people aren't explicit with their stakeholders. Literally use words like consumers, businesses, households, exporters, importers, government, whoever. Be specific with the stakeholders. Okay. So both. I'm about to go into this now. Now the idea is, remember, this is a two-type policy question, right? You're going to choose one policy by the end of this. So what you do is that, let's just say in this scenario, I'm going to choose policy one. I'm just going to say policy one to me seems better. At the end of policy one, and also while you're talking about benefits and detriments, it should become apparent to the reader that the benefits of policy one are better or outweigh the detriments of policy one. And that's what I said in the red here. That's like my last sentence in this body paragraph one or paragraph two, where I'm saying overall the benefits of blah, 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 so the benefits of policy one, outweigh the detriments of blah, blah, blah. Hopefully you have a bit more nuance than that when you're writing it. This is just me quickly writing it. Okay? Now, remember, 1 to 3 is paragraph 1. 4 is paragraph 2. And now this policy 2 paragraph is the exact same thing, except all you're saying now is because you said earlier that policy 1 benefits outweigh policy 1 detriments. You're going to say here that the detriments of policy 2 are too significant compared to the benefits. Okay? So, and you see that over here. So while policy 2's benefits of blah, blah, blah present major improvements for household living standards, its detriments of blah, blah, blah make it an inappropriate policy response. So you're kind of doing a mini conclusion at the end of policy 1, a mini conclusion at the end of policy 2, and then for the conclusion, you're actually doing a conclusion again. So you're kind of combining this red writing, and just giving a bit more nuance and detail, and you're using data, okay, to justify why you're choosing policy 1 over policy 2. So overall, blah, blah, blah. Policy 1, better policy, and just, yeah, write more than that. I haven't written enough there. And I said 1 to 2 sentences, probably 2 to 3, not 1 to 2. Is there questions about that? Because I know that's a lot. Where's eval? So analysis and eval are combined kind of here. Okay, so you're not actually, so you're for I3 and your I1 and whatever, look at all of economics, you're used to separating analysis and evaluation. You don't do that for the external response. Should we use explicit criteria? You don't have to, unless stipulated to by the question. So if the question tells you to use specific criteria, that's when you do use criteria. If you want to use criteria, you can, if you feel like it helps you structure your answer better or whatever, but you don't have to. Do we put some eval in the conclusion? I would do it. Yeah, I would do it. Just make sure it's justified. That's the main thing about the conclusion. What you need to do is you need to make it justified. Just have analysis and evaluation after each other. So what it is, like in terms of what was I saying? It's more so like analysis is data, right? Part of that data is at the start here where you're calculating this number to show the significance of the problem and describing what's happening in the economy. But you're still also going to be using data over here when you're talking about the benefits and detriments. Okay, so it's not explicitly split off into analysis and evaluation. I know you guys are used to that from your internal assessment, but it's not as relevant for the external. And if you look at the the marking guide, you'll see that it doesn't, like the marking guide isn't now split off into, what do you call it? It isn't split off into analysis and evaluation. It's split off into policies. And I'll show you what that means in a sec, actually. But next question. I thought we were meant to talk about economic perspectives in the start. Not really. It's more, well, you can, but it's more so you need to show what the problem is, calculate the number, show significance of the problem, and then say there's rationale for government intervention. Like source 3 says X, this means Y. Yeah, like that's pretty much what it is, Walter. Do we use a paragraph break in between to separate ideas or mush them together in one shot? So me personally, you can do whatever, to be honest, but me personally, I like keeping 1 to 3, 4 to like 1 to 3 is paragraph 1, policy 1 is paragraph 2, policy 2 as paragraph 3, and then conclusion as its paragraph 4. And the reason why is just because if you can structure your answer to reflect the marking guide, it makes it easier to mark. Okay. Do we use a paragraph break in between? Oh, that's what I said. Do you have a model response for any? Not in this PowerPoint, unfortunately. I do have some, but that's I only share that with tutoring students, unfortunately. Are we gonna do more masterclasses? Not sure. Oh yeah, someone asked us about word limits. So they are strict, but the way you should think about word limits is that the number of lines they give you, multiply that by 8 to 12. Okay? Or 8 to 13. That's kind of your limit of how much you can write. Pretty much you should just write to the end of the lines, and a little bit over you can afford. But I shouldn't catch any of you writing less than the number of lines they give you. How long should the conclusion be, would you suggest? I said over here 2 to 3 sentences. Or 3 to 4. If you go over, would you lose crazy marks? I think it's more so that they stop reading. So let's say you've used all of the space you have before the conclusion. They always have dedicated marks for the conclusion. So you'd lose all the marks for the conclusion. That's usually 2 to 3 marks that you've lost out of like a 20-something mark question. I'm going to quickly change my share because I want to bring up last year's marking guide really quick. This is a spoiler, I guess, because I'm showing you the marking guide. So if you haven't done it yet, signposting conclusion. Signposting is always a good idea. Am I fucked because my handwriting sucks and I use too many lines? Well, my handwriting is pretty bad too. It was probably worse than this in the exam. This is my handwriting, so that's fine. Signposting is basically saying, like, indicating to the reader what you're doing, right? So that's, for example, like this person said, if you're doing a conclusion, you start with, in conclusion, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Stop streaming. Let's share this. Okay, can you guys see the marking guide? Oh, this is I don't know. This is irrelevant. Okay. Give me a second. I don't know why my browser's doing this. How do you get your parents to love you? I think it's a lost cause for you, Chucky. Okay. God. Okay. So, I need to get this over here. Oh, not like that. So, I'm going to make this bigger. So the way I structured this, right, was that the initial paragraph is talking about the problem and quantifying the problem. And remember, I said you need to find 2 issues. I made this structure in I wrote this out in like a little similar masterclass last year. And if you look, describes the problem, and remember doing it twice. 1 mark there, 1 mark here. Calculate a number to show the significance of the problem over here. Okay, so if you follow this, you get full marks just from the first paragraph. Now over here. What's this? Is this the policies? No, it's not the policies. So similar kind of thing. When you're talking about the policies, these are similar data, just using data, quantifying and doing calculations. Again, 3 marks, easy marks. And now, when you're talking about the policies in specific and the benefits, right? Adding detail, talking about perspectives, again, full marks. Okay. And then when you get to the conclusion, which is over here, right? When you're talking about, when you're justifying it, using data, whatever, providing reasoning, that's the conclusion part, right? And it's also like the red bits, by the way, like over here, this red bit here, that also counts. If you do all those things, you would get a full mark response on this paper, right? So this structure works, okay? This structure is a good structure to use. Obviously, you don't have to use it, and obviously, you should try to improve it upon it yourself, because I made this 2 years ago. Any questions? Could you please give an example of meaning? It comes up in a second, but I think dy dx's explanation looks okay. Yeah, pretty much what he says. Cool numbers are sexy. Okay, back to this. I'm gonna have to change my share again, so bear with me. This is getting recorded, so there is that. Okay, so a bit more on the extended response. So when you're in the exam and you first see the stimulus, it's very common to be like, what the hell, right? It's why planning time is super. Actually, I just realized I got this. Yeah, you reminded me of something. But in the conclusion, would you recommend summarizing the justification? Yes, 100%. Yeah, that's the entire point of the conclusion. When you're concluding, you need to kind of you need to justify what you're saying. You 100% need to have justification. Can you tell me what basis points are? Yeah, I can in a second. The point I wanted to raise is that this here is for it's for a question type where there's two policies. I said I was going to talk about a one type policy question, and that's the question that I got in my year in 2023. What it is that the introduction stays the exact same. So 1 to 3 stays the exact same. Now, I can't use a policy 1, policy 2 structure because I don't have a policy 2. What you do is you copy this initial bit where you're describing the policy, explaining what it is, whatever. But instead of talking about benefits, you still talk about benefits and detriments, but you paragraph based on stakeholders. Okay, so it's a bit, honestly, person who was asking what's easier or what would I prefer, I'd probably prefer a 2 policy question. Because what you do is on this one policy type question, what you do is you group it based off stakeholders. So you would have a paragraph for consumers, a paragraph for businesses, or like a paragraph for government even. Okay, does that make sense? The difference between one policy structure and a 2 policy structure. 2 policy structure is this. If it's a 1 policy, you paragraph based on stakeholders. I'm going to take that as a yes. That makes sense. Okay. So in one policy, what decision do you make? You make the decision that yes, should this? Well, it's more so. It's either it depends what they ask you. So they might ask you, do you have to make no? It's more so if they ask you, do we go ahead with this policy? Yes or no? Then you answer that. That's the decision you make. If they don't say that, you kind of just need to summarize what you're saying, more so the costs and benefits. In each paragraph, do you explain the benefits and detriments and perspectives on the respective stakeholder? Yeah, exactly. So you will have a paragraph for consumers, benefits, detriments, consumers, benefits, detriments. So this is a new paragraph now for businesses. Another paragraph for government, maybe. So yeah, that's a very good point. Okay, so more on the extended response. When you're in the exam and you see the stimulus, it's very common to be like, what the hell is going on? I don't have any information here whatsoever. And it's why planning time is super important. Okay, so when you get into planning time, the first thing you should do is read the extended response, okay, and ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, is it a 1 policy question or a 2 policy question? Because remember, that dictates the structure we use. And then the second thing, is there any criteria I must use? So last year they had future employment as the criteria. Okay, if they give me criteria to use, then I must use that criteria. Now, another tip, and not just for economics, but if you can be bothered enough, reading the subject report isn't the worst idea in the world. It's particularly this section here called Practices to Strengthen. Okay, so quick story. Night before my exam, I didn't want to do any study, and I was just on like a voice call with my friends. And someone was like screen sharing the subject report because we're all nerds, I guess. And this came up where it says here that a common mistake for people was to say that the difference between interest rate of 2.5% to 2.25 basis points. What is it actually? How many basis points is that actually? Look at the 2023 exam. They're testing the exact same thing. Okay? A basis point is just like a unit. It's just a unit. So yeah, 225. The way you calculate this is you times it by 100. So 2.5 times 100. Wait, what? Yeah, 2.5 times 100, 0.25 times 100. If you subtract those, it's 225. Okay, so some final notes, right? So a very common thing, and if you guys have done UCAT, it's a common thing as well with the UCAT, is that you learn like all these strategies and techniques on how to answer questions, whatever. No, it's 1%. You learn all these techniques and whatever to, sorry, not 1%, 0.0, yeah, 0.01. You learn all these strategies and techniques to answer the questions, whatever. But then what happens is that on the day of the exam, you kind of just forget them. Or you just don't forget them, you just don't use them. Don't be one of those people. Whatever strategies you learn doesn't have to be mine. Whatever you come up with, make sure you use the same ones on the real day as you did in your practice. So that's what this is saying. Just don't overthink. Just always remember causality, directness, or multi-choice. So I think someone asked this earlier, is if a calculation is all we need when we're talking about data. There's 3 elements you need when talking about data. Okay? So you need the data range. So the data range here in this example is 4.5% to 5.8%. You need the time range, 2021 to 2023. And the third element I'm missing, I don't have it here, is the calculation. So it'd be 1.3 percentage point increase. So 5.8 take 4.5. So 3 elements: data range, time range, calculation. Data range, time range, calculation. Okay. And then I said, explain what it means economically, because remember, we give meaning to data. Always quantify. So this is, someone's asking me for an example of giving meaning. Here it is, number 3. So giving meaning to data is called interpreting. So for example, don't just say inflation increased by 5%. Say inflation rose 5% in 2023 above the target band, signaling this. This is in red because this is a structure. This is not a structure. It's like a range. Okay, it's not a hard and fast rule. Should you say unemployment rose from? You don't have to say the 2 years part, but you should say the difference part. So link cause and effects clearly. So instead of just saying the budget deficit increased or grew or whatever, give reasons for why it fell. Okay, so tax revenue fell. Why did tax revenue fall? Because of decreasing company profits. Healthcare rose. Why? Because of an aging population. Always ask why, and why. Policy, give limitations as well. Examples. Synthesis is linking ideas. So don't just say policy A does this, policy B does that. Compare them, weigh them, trade-offs. So number 7 here is a small detail, not really important, but in the sub report, they've kind of said they prefer you to say, like, in brackets, source 3, instead of saying, sorry, wait, am I reading this right? Source. Sorry, yeah, unemployment, they want you to do this, put the sources in the brackets instead of, yeah. Yeah, you can say S3 instead of source 3, that's what I did. Should you say increase by 1.3%? That's what I was getting at earlier. Because the units are in a percentage, you don't do a percentage of a percentage. When the units are in a percentage, you do an absolute difference. So you would say 1.5%. If this was 4.5 billion to 5.8 billion, then you can do like the 35% because the units is not a percentage. Yeah, number 7, by the way, they can't dock you marks for that. You don't get docked marks in economics, you just gain marks. So it's not really a big deal at all, to be honest. Last thing, I think this is the last slide. So again, examiners reward clarity and evidence. Okay, the marking guide is precise, so your answers and your writing need to reflect that level of precision and clearness and clarity. Waffling is not rewarded up to a certain point. So what I mean by that is that in the exam, you should be writing everything you know, which has usually been awarded marks. So those are the things like from the structures, like this thing, these kind of things, right? Now that will probably get you like most of the marks in the exam, 85 to 90% of the marks of the exam. Now there's always going to be some wild card marks, right? And those are the ones you kind of hope and pray for. And the way you get them is by waffling after you've done the things that are in your structures and the things that you know, which are typically rewarded. So waffling is okay, but after. So unless you've gone and done everything else. Every statement should make a point. The 15 minutes planning really is super, super important. On my mock exam, I got a 17 out of 25. And the reason why is just I was pretty lazy. I had like English the same day or something. I just couldn't be bothered actually using planning time for planning. I just kind of sat there. And like that made me, yeah, true excuses. It made me write like a really, really shitty extended response. And that's when I realized that, okay, my planning time is actually really important. How much study between mocks and real thing? For economics, not that much. Probably, well, compared to my other subjects, not that much. Probably the least apart from English. How many hours? I don't really remember. Probably like an average of 7 hours a week, like an hour a day, roughly. Economics is probably a subject I had to study least for. Like maths, yeah, just for econ. That was for mocks, the only 2 exams on the same day. I always had to give so much more time to economics specialist because I was just awful at maths, man. I got 23 in the final. So this checklist here, this here is something you need to be able to tick off. Okay, so apart from maybe this last point, because that's a bit sweaty, I'm not gonna lie, but being able to tick these 6 things off at the start, 6, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, is what you should be able to do the night before your exam. You should be able to tick all these things and say, yes, I can do these. And that's pretty much it. Thanks so much for sticking around and listening to me today. If you got any questions, you can DM me. But just keep in mind, I might not always have time to go super in depth, whatever. If you're after more like structured support, whatever, I also do offer personal tutoring as well, but I'm also insanely busy now for some reason. Everyone's tutoring at the moment. I do have some time, like 10 minutes or so. Is there any questions in terms of not just economics? It could be like other subjects, even though I'm not that good at other subjects. What school did I go down to? Trauma grammar. TGS. Can I run through that one multi-choice? How the fuck do you know Haruka? What the hell? I see that guy at the gym. What the hell? That's so weird. Anyway, which question is it? This question you're referring to? Oh, Aussie. How much study did I do between mocks and the real for all subjects? So I don't know how, like, I couldn't actually quantify it for you. I'll tell you what I did. Is that oh, sorry, I missed your question earlier, Morty. I'll scroll up to that one as well. So what I did is I went to the library with my friends, and I would be there for a while, but that doesn't mean I studied that whole time, or most of that time. Well, a lot of that time, really, because yeah, I don't know. I was just having fun with my friends, to be honest. I will say though, relatively, economics is probably the ones I'd say the least for. Chem would have been a fair bit. Physics, I crammed a bit towards the end just because I found it not too bad. Chemistry, yeah, a lot. Specialist, a lot. Methods, not so much as well. Economics, not that much. Again, keep in mind, relatively speaking, I'm not saying that I didn't study because I definitely did. I'm not trying to say that, I'm definitely not the smartest. Where's this question from Morty? I saw it, but I didn't answer it. How much time do you recommend for the extended versus short? So for the extended response, I usually dedicate 50 minutes to an hour and 5 minutes, I guess, anywhere between there. If you kind of account for multi-choice being 10 minutes, right? You subtract that from 2 hours. Whatever time's left is pretty much how much there should be for the short response, right? Did I miss any other questions? Oh, so you want me to run through this question? Was it this one you're referring to? The day simp? Also, should we feel the need to fill in all the lines in short? Yeah. There shouldn't be a single line. I got 25% for mocks. Am I cooked? If you're talking about economics, I don't think so. I did really. I got 30-something% for my chemistry mock. I know it's chemistry though, but I didn't do too badly on the external. I hope ISCON stabs you. Yeah. What was my ATAR? 9.85. How to memorize reaction pathways? Draw them every day. Just draw them. I tried to use Anki to memorize them, and then I just realized I was shit. So just draw them. Draw like the thing. How many subjects did I study a day? I don't really know or remember. Probably like, if I had to guess, it would be like 3 to 4. More so, what I recommend is that, well, me personally, I study best in the mornings as well, because that's just when my brain's the freshest, and I think most people are the same. Always put the subject you want to study the least or you find hardest in the morning. So specialist, I found it the hardest, but I actually really enjoyed it. But chemistry, I hated that shit. So I would study it earliest in the morning, first thing in the morning, to get it out of the way. And then like towards the afternoon, and like I still do a similar thing now for like uni. I would have no energy. Like my energy just drops off in the afternoon. So what I would do is I would either like exercise, go for a walk, whatever. Or I would study something like methods, or something maybe physics, or maybe even like maybe specialist, but something that could chill a bit more with. More so methods than physics, because it's just doing like maths, right? Where do you get good questions from? Good questions from apart from past exams. I have a bunch of like company ones that I use, but I would say you can also you can look at QCE, sorry, not QCE. You can look at VCE or HSC. They have some okay ones. Okay, sorry. Yeah, they sent this question. So, which fiscal policy? Oh, that one. Okay, yeah. So, just for everybody in the chat, I'm talking about this question now. So, which fiscal policy option would be most appropriate in a period of slowing economic growth, low wage growth, and low inflation? So when I first did this, I was actually doing it with a student, and I got it wrong. But remember, when we're answering multi-choice, we use direct and causal. So if I'm looking at answer option A here, a decrease in the cash rate, that's not fiscal policy. It's monetary policy. So that gets cut off straight away. Tax cuts and changes to tax brackets to address bracket creep. That makes sense, so we'll pause it for causal. Increase in infrastructure spending. That also kind of makes sense, so we'll pass it for causal. And increase in minimum wage. A kind of side note about that specific thing where they talk about increases in minimum wage. It's a kind of common answer option. And oftentimes it's wrong, just as an answer option. And the reason why is because if you increase the minimum wage, who does that benefit? That benefits people earning minimum wage. It doesn't benefit the kind of wide spectrum of all income earners. Which is why oftentimes answers that say increase in minimum wage aren't correct. But that's not a hard and fast rule, but kind of keep it in the back of your head. So A and D we eliminated, B and C. So talking about directness now. So directness, remember, is asking yourself what has the least number of loops or jumps in conclusion or steps. So whatever's the quickest is the best answer option. And the idea here is that tax cuts and changes to tax brackets is just a quicker, faster method, I guess, of increasing economic growth, wage growth, and inflation, in particular, wage growth, right? Because C does increase all those things, but in particular for wage growth, infrastructure spending, to increase wage growth, you would kind of need to create jobs, and you would need to have demand for those jobs, and then, have demand for employment, my bad, to get wage growth. And that there is what, in particular, drives wage growth. So that's why C is a worse answer option compared to B, because it's less direct. So it takes a longer time for infrastructure spending to see increases in wage growth compared to changing tax brackets. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Do I recommend doing long response first? So that was on this slide. So I'll go over this again. This is how I did it. So start writing extended response first. And I do recommend doing that first, especially if you're going to plan it out. It's fresh in your head. Why not do it? And it's just trying to make sense to do the biggest task in the exam first. A key thing that for me personally for exams, not just economics, is flow. Being in like a flow state where you're kind of just doing questions, you're not kind of stopping, right? So that's part of the reason why I started with the easiest short response, because I know I can smash that out and I know I'm confident with it. And once I'm building momentum through the exam, that kind of helped me personally with like the harder questions. Did I do English? I did do English. Did I like chemistry? God, no. But in retrospect, it looks not too bad. Can you go through the structure for short response again? Here it is. So am I still showing my screen? Yeah, cool. So again, you just ask yourself, well, read the question, whatever. What did I have to do? Analyze, evaluate, conclusion, decision, any of those things. Any key terms I have to define. Okay. Background knowledge, the main kind of thing, and keep in mind that a big part of short answer is the graph stuff we did earlier. So that's a part of this. So if you had a graph to draw, you would somewhere here have to insert some mention of the you would have to mention like the specific points in the graph. Work in twos is probably the biggest thing for short response. And remember, on top of that, linking it to the macroeconomic objectives. So price stability, internal stability, external stability, sustainable economic growth, full employment, and living standards. Limitations, however, this means that calculations, blah, blah, blah. And then if you have a conclusion, always justify it using data. What did I use Anki for? I used it for... what did I use it for? I would have used it... Well, ironically enough, I kind of hated drawing, like for methods, I hated drawing the special triangles. So I only did it for like 10 minutes one day and I've memorized them ever since. I just put all the special like trig values in. So like sine 30 is a half, sine 60 is root 3 on whatever. Like those ones. I just did that. I also did for physics, like definitions and stuff. Chemistry, maybe like definitions as well. Yeah, for economics, low-key I didn't. I don't think I did. Oh, actually, I didn't use Anki, but I did use like a form of active recall. For like, there was like some things that I just didn't remember. I was just like remembering. Like things like the history of like microeconomic reform. I used that. Where's this recording being uploaded? I don't know. Maybe YouTube. Was Brett Economics good before the exam? I've seen his stuff. It's low-key very similar to mine, like what we've done today. I think he goes through like all the papers and stuff, so I can't imagine it'd be terrible to watch. How do you approach studying for econ? Do you think it's worth reading the budget? No, it is not worth it. Okay, it's not worth reading the budget or statements of monetary policy. I know some people do that. I know some people do that to like answer the questions where they ask you about specific policy. But if you think about it, is it really worth your time investment? Is it worth spending all that time reading the budget, whatever, to hopefully get like a mark or two on your exam versus spending that time to study like your other subjects and get way more likely to get other marks in your other subjects? So I know some people do it. I've had students in the past who've done it, but I wouldn't say it's worth it. Multi-choice favor demand side solution. Not particularly, really. What? Haruka's in the chat. Why can't I find a job? I think it's because of the degree you're studying. What subjects I do? Economics, specialist methods, physics, chem. What other subjects do I tutor? Right now it's just methods, physics, economics, English. So and I can't. I guess I can do chem, but kind of don't want to. Should current economic events be referenced, used, mentioned at all? No. Don't unless they're mentioned through stimulus. You don't bring that kind of external knowledge into the exam. Which current economic events are most important to know? I'll probably just say. Yeah, I mean, like, I guess the cash rate. If you really wanted to care, I don't know what the cash rate is now. And I don't think it's really beneficial to know specific things. 3.6. But like, yeah, I didn't know what the cash rate was back then, or JoJo's doing one, which is sometime. You should join that one. She's much better at cheering out than me. A job keeper, job seeker, implied knowledge. I like you would say so. Yes, just know what they are. So what you can do is I'll just share my Discord. So if you look here, right, if you click on this drop down here, and then where the fuck is it? Yeah, 4 events. This is like mine. This is me playing Minecraft, right? Physics here, mastering. Wait, is this it? Yeah, English. Oh, that's biology. Is she not doing an English one? Oh, I thought she was going to do an English one. Okay, maybe she's not doing an English one. Well, oh, right. The English one was in real life. Makes sense. Well, what you can do is that if you go on the YouTube channel, there's a English one from last year, which is just as applicable. What do you do if you don't know how to answer a short response? There's not much you can do. You just need to write then. Like if you don't know what it's saying, you need to you kind of just need to write something, right? Ideally, you prepare well so you don't encounter that experience. But if you're in a scenario where you just blank, you need to write something and just try to use whatever terminology or whatever theory you know, whatever whatever you know pretty much, and try to use it. Yeah, the Queensland Study Hub YouTube channel, and also like the structures, by the way, the structures that you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, Oliver, Barr-David or something. I'm doing better methods, but scaling high in English because I'm giving up on English because I was happy with passing. My English is borderline, becoming worse in English. What do you think about this tactic? That's the tactic that I used. So I didn't try in English at all because I just betted on my other subjects scaling better. I think it's okay, but you need to. It depends. It's very like specific. It's dependent on you. Do you choke exams? Are you gonna? Is there a chance you choke your maths external? Yeah. When you say barely, do you mean like your raw mark or do you mean your scaled mark? Is the QCAA commendation useful? I think it's pretty useless, to be honest. Scaled mark. I mean, what other subjects do you do? I think you should. I mean, your other subjects are pretty good. I think you should just try in both. If it's that close, and you feel like if maths is close to English, that kind of indicates that your maths isn't as going as well as you wanted. So I'd probably, in that scenario, I'll try both. Like I'll try in both, just because it's especially something like maths is a bit hard to predict how well you would do. Prediction on this is extended response. If I'm doing PE, do you think that would scale me down a lot? Well, it's probably like looking at your subjects. It's probably your worst scaling subject. You know? Oh, business is that's a general. Is business a subject that like actually? Is that an ATAR subject? Well, I'll just say it probably will scale it down a little bit. Scale similar to PE. Yeah, probably, but like, there's nothing you can do about that. Just do as well as you can. Yeah, end the recording. Thanks, Johan. There was another question I missed. Prediction on